welcome to JCrimiTalk. Today we are going to be discussing a topic thought of by Rosalie. She'll be, I don't know why I said it like that. She'll be taking forth today and taking charge of the conversation regarding the funding cuts in youth offending and things like that. So I'll pass it over to her and discuss the issue and the potential consequences. And feel free to contact us on social media and with your opinion, and if the funding cuts have ever impacted you or impacted somebody you know. Right?
Hey, well, we've both been having a bit of research, haven't we, to see how this is affecting people, and a story that's actually come out today, which is the 20th of March, is that some of the reduction in funding is having an impact to do with youth club services as well, which you can argue would also have an impact on young offenders and people in the community. And it seems as though between 2012 and 2014 there's been a reduction of £60 million worth of funding.
That's quite a lot. That's a big amount.
That's a lot of money.
Massive amount. And you think, it sounds very cliche, but children are the future. And I believe strongly that you should have a lot of money and revenue going into youths and things that they can do and creative ideas and things like that. To deter crime, because obviously
I agree, because they're gonna make the future better for everyone else. But if you don't give them enough, if there's not enough funding for them, not sufficient centers for them to help better them now, then there's no way you can get a good future.
It gives me it kind of catalyses relative deprivation, because if they haven't got centres or places or institutions that they can go to let out if they've got anger issues, or if just general places for young people to go, how are they going to progress? And they're kind of leading themselves into the bad route, which may end up being offending. I'm not saying all youths are going to end up like that, but that could be a potential ending or outcome.
Exactly. And if you look down on them now, then how are they going to pick themselves up and progress in the future? If you're constantly questioning them and their actions, maybe some of their actions might be wrong and they need to be questioned, but you can't stereotype and say it's every young person out there, because then they're just going to live up to their labels.
But do you not think as well, with the removal of these fundings, it's going to, obviously, as we've already discussed, it's potential issues in the future. But let's say the services for the elderly that we currently have now, had there been, no cuts, for medical services and things previously, would there be such an issue now? So I think the same thing stands now with the cuts for the youths. It's going to, in, say, 40, 50 years, how is it, okay, maybe not that far forward, maybe 30, 40 years, how is it going to impact different things within society? So I do think youths are the foundation and should be a priority in society. So
you found some good information as well, didn't you, to do with the point at which it was seen that youth offending needed to be focused on as a thing to be funded, and
an alternative means of punishment as well for youths that offend.
I came up with some of the things they said, which is what's causing problems amongst the youth, is they're feeling isolated. There's gang involvement has become problematic over the years. There isn't enough support between the youth and the adult systems. You look at youth and you just think that they're separate from adults. You don't realise in a few years' time they will be that adult.
That's the same thing I was considering.
They will be that adult. So, and
that's what the law of and policymakers and the politicians are failing to realise. These young people, they're not going to be 17, 18 forever. Exactly. They're not going to be having ASBOs for the rest of their lives. They are going to grow up and they're going to be people, and they should be entitled to the same futures that everybody's entitled to. So if you're from a deprived background, you should be entitled to the same opportunities that someone from a relatively a rural background, let's say, for example. and this is what these cuts are failing to realise, that in the long term it's going to affect them, and they're failing to see that they're going to become adults. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, that was a good point actually, and that's what I wanted to say. So
it's that idea that the longer that these communities have no funding, the longer that the impact that is going to have, and the more likelihood that maybe in the future it's as though it's storing up future funding issues, because if you have to have a situation where there are more police on the beat, or there are more Borstal, I don't even really, I suppose it's more young youth offending units as opposed to Borstal these days, but the more that those places will have to be funded than if they were prevented in the first place.
And that's what it is. I think there's a failure, and this isn't just regarding youths and funding cuts just for the young people, it's funding cuts in general. There's a failure for policymakers and politicians and researchers to see that prevention, I believe, is better than cure, and I think things are done policies are made too late to try and fix issues that could have been solved in the first place.
So now everyone's looking for the solution to youth offenders, but if there were those centres there, those training centres, areas, like places for them to go, would youth offending be such a big problem right now?
The thing is, though, there are places for them to go, but it's these funding cuts that aren't allowing them to be run as well as they could be, because there's I've got a few people that people on social media that I see working actively to prevent youth offending and things like that, and it's the same with a lot of other things. There's many organisations out there, but because of these funding cuts, they can't be carried out as well as they would like to be. So it doesn't mean to say there's none out there. It's just they can't be run.
It's just they're limited.
Yeah, very limited.
Very limited to a point where how much impact can they have? How effective can they be run?
Exactly.
If there's not enough funding.
But then, as well, a thought just popped to my head. Are the youths demanding a service? Do the youths know that they're in trouble?
Yeah,
because
that's a very good point.
Do they know that there's, because obviously 14, 15-year-old me would never have, thinking back in hindsight to things that you experience as a teenager and things you do, I would never have thought maybe that was wrong. So at the moment these young people are thinking that there is no issue.
And the more you talk about it, the more they're going to realise that there's an issue, so you might as well take advantage. I'm not saying they do, but there's a chance that they might, like everyone's talking about youth offending, so let's use that as an excuse, or let's use it in a way that works for us and demand more, maybe.
That is a tough
point,
one, isn't it?
It's like,
because it's kind of like, at what point do you admit that there are situations in your community or in your daily life that you're perhaps not comfortable with, but you can't address? So, is it, surely these places should exist because there is it's mentioned, I think, in one of these articles, there's a safe place for people to share time and then also not feel so pressured to take.
But then as well, do you think, with these funding cuts, there have been people arguing and saying that, there is an issue, and people have been coming forward and saying, I'm just thinking of all these other dimensions, have people been coming forward and saying, there is a problem and there is still no viable solution.
I suppose the fact these articles that we've been reading, that people are talking about it, it's like, how do we get motions put in place to regain that funding? How do we kind of...
I think more now, that was really... not good grammar, sorry. I do think, I keep referring to politicians and I'm kind of making it become a political debate. It's just a general social issue, in my opinion. But
that should be cross-party.
Yeah, through all, academias and things like that who do look at these kind of issues and try and come up with viable solutions. But I do think maybe the people that are implementing these funding cuts need to start thinking a bit more emotively. I always usually say think theoretically about things, and it's clear that they're probably thinking theoretically on a bigger, grander scale, but they need to think a bit more emotively, because how would they feel if, as a result of these funding cuts, their child, didn't have the opportunities to go to youth clubs or and subsequently ended up going down the wrong path.
Yeah.
So I do think maybe that could be a future solution.
But you can say that's a problem with like a lot of like laws and legislations, that when they get made, in theory they're good, but when you put it in practice, it becomes difficult.
Yeah.
And that's when they realise that there's a problem, or there's something, and it's too late, and now we need a solution. But if they had looked at it before and tried to put it in practice, or think of how it would be in practice, rather than just looking at it on paper,
Very
then
much so.
it could be easier in a way to like, because when you put something into practice, you look at the pros and the cons and the advantages and disadvantages. But when you just put it in theory, like this could be good, this could be bad, but you only realise once it gets done that there's a fault here, there's a little loophole here that we could have covered.
Yeah.
But then when it's come out, it's too late.
Yeah.
And then they're like, we need a
And then there's
solution now.
obviously regarding being too late and things like that, regarding the Sean incident that we'll refer to in another show. But such issues like that, it's such a drastic outcome. I should hope that that's not the outcome for all other situations and young people that are subject to these funding cuts. But it's just a bit unfortunate, really, and it's sad to see that. I just feel like society's giving up on the youth. That's how these funding cuts come across, really, to me.
And it's sort of, are these consultations that are going on when the laws and legislations are created, are they opening the doors enough to youth and community-based groups to give their inputs to make sure that these are measures that will,
They're
be
clearly
effective?
not,
They're not. It doesn't seem to me so.
But then when you think of like laws being made, everyone just stereotypes and think of the people who are making these laws. Are they the same as the people who are going to be dealing with the laws?
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
So there's a little issue there as well, isn't there?
The grey area.
Yeah.
It's true, because people never think about that. Clearly me as well, going all political and stuff a few minutes ago. But there are organisations and services that are counterproductive as a result of funding cuts and funding ventures.
I think maybe a future solution or research could be talking to these people who run these services and these centres to see how they need the government's help, how they need all the services to be more effective.
Yeah.
I agree there's been a lot of cuts in funding, but if a few centres are getting more funding than the other centres and they have shown that they're more effective, maybe that's how other centres need to run. But they can't just automatically cut all the funding. But there has to be something there out there to show that it's good. If you give more funding to these centres and these units, then maybe they can show the progress and they can show progression in the future to show that they are working. So these cuts shouldn't be there, really.
Exactly. I don't believe they should be there. And if they are there, then it shouldn't be such a big cut, because that's a massive cut. On top of all childcare cuts, benefit cuts, every cut going on. I'm surprised there's anything out there, actually.
Well,
but do you think that creates more problems at the moment, simply because everyone's talking about this been cut, that's been cut, this been cut, don't realise where the actual real problems lie, where the real cuts have affected people, because everyone generalises and like there's been medical cuts, there's been youth offending, there's been
legal
cuts
aid.
in that,
legal
aid's been cut. So when is it that fact that it becomes a problem because everyone just generalises as cuts, and that creates more like panic and hysteria amongst not realising that
then,
maybe it was a good cut. I'm
Yeah,
just
but
trying to
then-
think of the
but
other
then-
side that
You can also argue, excuse me, you can also argue that obviously every cut is different to every
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
Certain cuts don't matter to me, and that sounds really
Yeah,
horrible.
but it
But
doesn't.
certain cuts won't affect me, should I say,
Yeah.
directly. Youth offending cuts to a certain degree won't massively affect me, but should I ever have children and things like that, I'll it will indirectly affect
Yeah.
me.
Like,
So
yeah.
at this point, certain cuts obviously don't affect people at the same time. So that's probably why.
Exactly, but that doesn't mean they turn a blind eye to these cuts.
Mhm.
Like, oh, it doesn't. Like, you get a lot of people out there saying it's not affecting me, so why should I be bothered? Not just
That's
with
true.
cuts, it's everything. There's loads of stuff that takes place in the world, and everyone's like, doesn't matter. It's not affecting me at the moment. But what if you were in that situation
Yeah.
in the future? What if it did affect you? Would you still be acting the same way? What if it's affecting some of your family members? Or that
It's
you
Yeah.
can't just turn a blind eye because it hasn't affected you right now.
Yeah, it's true. You're right, and I should take heed of that. But so okay, regarding these cuts and potential issues that may arise from these youth offending cuts, because that's the main issue we've got going on at the moment. What do you think can be done to so we can conclude? But what can be done to resolve this issue? To put forward, do you think we should have a march, to petitions, just or any form of awareness? What do you think we first as individuals, then as a society, we can do to promote the issue regarding these funding cuts for youth offending and such institutions?
I suppose, as we were talking about, maybe consult with the bodies that are already successful, that are currently still have funding, and as you were saying, why do they have funding? Perhaps they have funding because what they're doing is successful, and try to see if there's a sort of structure that they have that seems to work for particular reasons. If you can find out what those particular reasons are about how they are successful, then perhaps maybe you can
implement them elsewhere,
or lobby government for further funding. I think, as you were saying, I think the sad thing is that if you've got a sector of the electorate, the people that make the votes and therefore change what policies are going to be put in place, if they are actually physically not able to vote, if they're under 18, which is what we have with youth offenders or youths in society generally, then it's not going to get addressed because they don't physically have a voice. So that idea, like you were saying, of all of us perhaps realising what an impact it could have on everybody's lives.
But does that mean it should be ignored? Shouldn't? Maybe it's the youth who need to do something. They need to speak up. They need to somehow, I don't know, try to contact MPs saying that this centre was here before.
Yeah.
And we used to go there. We used to do this. Now we're doing this.
That's true.
Like, there needs to be someone.
But
rather than everyone else talking about it, you need the people who it's affecting to talk about it more.
But firstly, they need to be affected, like I argued before, because okay, for them it's a case of this let's say hypothetically this youth centre's closed down. It's all right. I'll go to the park and chill in the park with my friends. It's okay. I still get to see my friends. So they're not seeing the bigger picture and the bigger issue regarding this youth centre being closed, or this youth offending assistance charity being cut down.
Exactly.
So until they actually physically see the consequences and feel the problem, then I think it's a good solution. But I think that's the only downside to it, is they have to realise.
It's great that everyone's talking about it, but until the people who are being affected by it don't talk about it, you can't do anything, because they're the ones who are getting impacted. They have the effects of it. Right,
so we've heard their opinions about the funding cuts for youth offending, and it's quite interesting actually. It's kind of, as I say, every episode opens my eyes when I get to speak to these ladies. So what do you think about these funding cuts, not necessarily just to youth offending, even though that's our main discussion, but do you think it affects certain people at certain times, and what solutions do you think can be put forth, and has it affected you? Contact us on Facebook, contact us on Twitter. Our email address will all be placed at the end for you to get in touch with us, because we want to know your personal opinions about things like this and issues, so we can, take them further and hopefully come up with solutions for you as well. Thank you for watching today. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.